Hey folks, how's it going? RedMaster here, and welcome back to another interview, I guess we're doing here for the Cards and Castles sequel, as we've brought back on our good friend from the last interview that we did, Vectivus. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about all the progress that we've made since the last time we chatted, because so many things have come together in the last couple of months.
Certainly. There's a lot to discuss, a lot to talk about here, but I think what we want to focus on today, obviously, is the campaign. We revealed it to all of the kind folks, I believe, just last week at the time of recording, and there's a lot of positive reception behind the campaign as of now. Not too much to be shown, but it's leaving a lot to be desired here, and hopefully our discussion today will help clear things up for some people who may be a bit more curious on what you guys have been doing behind the scenes for the campaign, and maybe for the larger game as a whole. So I'm really excited to talk about that. And I guess we'll go ahead and get started here with my first question, and that is the essential motivation behind introducing a campaign to the product. What made you guys want to commit to doing that idea, bring it in as I imagine, big part of your release?
I think there's a couple of reasons. For myself, background-wise, I know from personal experience from other game studio environments that I've worked in or other projects that I have supported during the time that I've worked in the industry that there are a lot of people who simply don't play multiplayer games. And it's really kind of an interesting phenomenon when you dig into it, because even games that you would expect are overwhelmingly popular specifically for their multiplayer, if they offer a robust single player experience, that's often where a pretty significant portion of your player base goes. As an example, it's relatively public knowledge that roughly 50% of all the people who ever bought StarCraft 2 from Blizzard only ever played the single player campaign. They didn't boot up a single multiplayer match, not one of the fun, like non-standard competitive modes, not a co-op mission, nothing. It was just the single player. And that's a game that is religiously touted for how popular it was in multiplayer. And I think that was a big source of inspiration on the one hand. The other thing, and I can only say so much here, but one of the things that we are really trying to do with the sequel is ensure that people get I would say a better return on their investment into the game. So we're not, as it stands, planning necessarily on having card packs in the traditional sense, the way that other card games that you might have played in the past did, because they're a little bit predatory, frankly, in terms of how that monetization works. So when the sequel releases, it's more likely that you will have a smaller one-time cost associated with unlocking content in the game, whether that's cards or parts of the cosmetic options that are available for profile pictures and custom castles and that kind of thing. We don't want the game to be really focused on that constant, like you have to pay $10 every time there's a new card you want type of feel. And in order to feel like that was fair, we wanted that initial purchase where we ask you for, that first 10, 15, $20, whatever it is, to feel like you were getting a lot for that money. And so we set out to build something that would feel good as a purchase like that. Because if you go to spend, that much money on another game, how much do you get for that investment? So in addition to what I think is a great multiplayer experience, and we've done a lot of work on that, we just also wanted something else for everyone, but also for people who explicitly only want to play the game by themselves. The previous Cards and Castles, if you didn't want to play multiplayer, there really wasn't a lot there for you. And this way, I think, will hopefully expose a whole new group of players to the game. And obviously the hope is some of those people play single player, get excited, try multiplayer. But at the end of the day, if someone just wants to play the campaign to see the storytelling and all the incredible art and music and work that went into that, that's great. That's a huge win for us if people pay for the game, play the single player, and just really love that part of it.
That's kind of exciting to hear because obviously you just mentioned how you want a lot, or like you want to make it feel that you're putting your money into just one amazing product, not having to spend a lot of money, here and there, essentially when the game gets updated. And yeah, that does sound like an incredible direction to go here, especially more so the fact that the card packs are not going to be a thing. Obviously, we can't say for sure, or at least I don't know if you can. But if that's the direction that you're going to, that might be an interesting portion to think about how maybe some future content will be added in then if there's no card pack or traditional card pack system like you see in other card games here. Because, I mean, recently thinking even back to like Hearthstone, who recently just dropped their, I think, the Forged and the Barons expansion. Again, that's a similar system to, getting card packs, buying new cards, spending additional money here. So do you think that is you want to stay away from that when doing the sequel? Is that the direction you're kind of pushing away from in a way to kind of make yourself stand out a bit better in the field?
A little bit. I mean, I think obviously game development has costs. So as we continue to iterate on additional content down the road, if we want to add, a big drop of new cards, for example, post release, we will likely look at additional monetization beyond your initial purchase. But it's not going to be, every card pack costs you $2 and the average player has to buy 200 packs to unlock all the cards. Like it'll be you pay one time a $10 purchase on that expansion, and these numbers are made up. Don't hold me to the cash values, but you make that one time purchase, and now you've unlocked the new set. And you might have to like play the game or log in to unlock cards, but you won't have to keep paying to unlock cards. That's the thing we want to get away from.
Right. I think they actually experimented with that. I mean, again, I don't know how informed you are on the original, but they did do something like that in the past. One of the smaller sets we did towards the later end of the game here, Call of the Grave, where it was a similar idea. We paid a cash value up front here, and we were given sort of a full play set of the set here. And I think if that tradition continues, it might look a whole lot better for people looking to kind of pick up some new cards rather than having to go through pack after pack here. Just picking up the whole set for one price, I think, is an incredible direction to go here. So that is really exciting. But going back to the campaign, you mentioned how it's going to be obviously single player here, maybe aimed more for people who play single player. But do you feel that the campaign can be used as kind of a learning tool for players who may be looking to learn more about the cards and the factions that they may have not have access to at first? Seeing the pre-made decks made me think that the story is somewhat trying to impart some knowledge into the players. How true do you feel that is when it comes to the campaign?
I mean, yeah, yes and no. Obviously, part of the initial sort of campaign experience is meant to be a formal tutorial to help, especially our newer players or someone maybe who hasn't played a game in this genre at all, through kind of the baby steps, right? Especially with all the new mechanics that the sequel introduces. So, we want to make sure people understand that units have levels and that that's the indication of their approximate power. We want to make sure that players understand that units have classes and how those mechanics work and interact. We need to make sure players understand, in broad strokes, general game mechanics, right? Movement and range and all of these things. So we're going to onboard players through the first couple of missions, especially in the campaign, to sort of teach them those things. Mm-hmm. In a larger sense beyond that, I would say the missions do a pretty good job of showcasing a wide variety of potential strategies, things that might be viable in multiplayer or that might be informative in how you might want to construct your own decks down the road. But there's a lot of what goes on in the campaign that it's not designed to be a one-to-one reimagining of the multiplayer experience. The different mission types often deviate from what a traditional multiplayer game would look like because you start with units on the board or you're given access to additional card draw or additional resources because that fits both mechanically how we want that mission to play and narratively the story of where you are in the campaign and in the world. So I think it's certainly true that like you might play a mission where, as an example, you use a lot of ranged units which are more effective against flying units, and that might help you to understand the value of including ranged units in your deck, because you can see how that might play out in a traditional multiplayer game setting. But by way of another example, there's a mission in the campaign where the AI casts a spell every other round, and you can't do that in a multiplayer game because you can only have a certain number of copies of that card in your deck. So it's definitely gonna challenge players to learn those mechanics in a way that will be valuable to them if they want to play multiplayer or get exposed to a wide variety of different strategies that are potentially possible with different factions or combination of factions. But on the flip side, you're also going to get to see a bunch of stuff that's impossible in a multiplayer game if you play through the campaign, which I'm hoping is, potentially something that makes the campaign attractive to our more hardcore multiplayer audience, because it will give them some challenges they've never seen and some complex interactions that they can solve the puzzle. And there are missions where I'm really excited to throw out challenges like, hey, who can beat this mission the fastest, or who can beat this mission with the most cards left in their hand, or whatever. Like, there's lots of ways that you can see who's playing a given campaign mission at a higher level, and I think people will kind of catch on to that as they see which missions have different levels of difficulty or how they can solve the puzzles. In particular, the campaign, I think, teaches people stuff that really would warp your perception of the game towards how to beat the AI versus what you would take back into multiplayer. There are lots of missions where the correct decision is to pass on initiative and let the AI move its units first so that you can put yours in better positions, which you would never do in a multiplayer game because you don't want to give up your combat initiative.
Right.
So it's definitely just, I think there's a variety, and hopefully it'll be a little bit of both. It'll encourage people to understand some of the things about how the game plays that they could take with into multiplayer. It'll encourage people to bring their multiplayer exclusive experience and try out the unique puzzles in the single player. That's the dream.
Okay. All right. I mean, I expected probably to be a learning tool. I think that did cover what I was trying to address here, where I think someone can walk into the campaign and, learn sort of the core behind it. But obviously, they shouldn't expect the campaign to sort of be the be-all, end-all multiplayer teacher, because there are going to be differences, as you said, with the scenarios that we find ourselves in. For example, I mean, the spells that you were just talking about here, having those pop every turn. Again, not something that we see in multiplayer. But also, I do think that it should be a strong learning tool, at least to help understand the bare basics of it, which is really great, I think. And yeah, excited to see maybe campaign speedrunning could be a thing. I don't know. You made it sound like there are challenges with the campaign that we can, as a community, sort of build around, and that seems like a direction. I mean, obviously, I'm just spitting ideas here, but...
Right. We're going to have to see once it goes live. There's a lot of things that we're still talking about in terms of, do we want to add variable difficulty? I guess I can tell you this. This is probably the first time that this has ever come up. One of the things that I am going to work on, in addition to the design of the story-driven campaign, is a series of single-player versus AI challenges of substantially higher difficulty. It'll be an environment where you can just try, like, we're going to build a mission and it's an infinite number of Craxuses are going to spawn and attack you. How many can you withhold, or how many rounds can you survive?
Oh, dear.
It's a mission you can't win, but it might allow people to see, like, okay, what's the best possible solution? Like, what deck does this the best? What combination of units and spells does this the best? We're going to try and add some stuff like that to the game so that there's this separate sort of arena-themed segment of the single-player environment. And that will be where you get to go and play with your constructed decks in a single-player environment. So if you want to practice building a deck, some of them will be very simple. It'll just be like, okay, here's a hyper-aggressive deck piloted by the AI. You can try out your anti-aggro decks in this particular place. because you don't have another human to practice with right now. We will be trying to do a wide variety of that kind of stuff. We'll see, right? We'll kind of see
Right.
what that encourages. But I could see a world where people would want, okay, what's the fastest you can win arena mission number 5, or what's the most number of waves you've ever survived in arena mission number 10, or whatever that might look like.
Okay. Wow. All right. Well, I mean, I'm definitely curious where you guys will take that eventually. Obviously, uh, that is still in a very maybe early stage of planning.
Yet
But
not a single one of those has actually been started yet. To be clear, like I want to do that, we have not done it yet.
okay. Well, that certainly sounds like a great idea for maybe some more field-based testing with maybe a multiplayer deck to really give it maybe like a ringer here. But with that being said, I think we can move back into the campaign, and I kind of want to go back to sort of the difficulty of a campaign mission here. You mentioned with a potential for challenge mode and how they're not intended to win, but what about the campaign as a whole? I think we mentioned in the release video that there is no difficulty filter attached to the campaign, so players can't really choose between an easy, standard, or harder experience. How do you feel about the current difficulty of the campaign, where it stands right now? Do you think that most, if not all, the players should be able to complete the campaign, or will it be some kind of rare achievement amongst the player base that maybe like, you'll see your top players be the ones to complete the campaign, everyone else might have a little bit of struggle, but maybe can do it? Is there any sort of like direction that you think the campaign is specifically headed in at this particular point that you can share?
Yeah, I think the goal certainly is that anyone who put the time in could beat it. I think there are a lot of the missions in the current design that players won't beat the first time because there are surprises, right? Things that happen that you weren't expecting. So your first playthrough might be to learn the mechanics, right? Understand what your opponent is going to do, and then go back to it a second time with more knowledge and say, okay, I know that partway through the mission, this thing is going to happen. Now that's not a surprise. Or, oh, I only have this many rounds to beat this mission. I need to be more aggressive in my next playthrough. My hope is, even for a talented player, that they can't beat every mission on the first try. That's, I think, kind of my like guiding light. Having said that, it would be really disappointing, I think, from a difficulty and complexity sense, if the game shipped, even just the early access component, which isn't going to be the whole campaign, it's just going to be a couple of chapters of it. If we were to ship early access and, an average player who purchased the game can't beat an average mission, I think that would mean that we had tuned the difficulty too high. So I'm expecting that we'll get some additional feedback on that. We've got a handful of folks who are playtesting the campaign for us right now. And this is also challenging because I don't want a large number of playtesters to be exposed to all of the campaign's mechanics and all of the storyline surprises before it releases, right? We're trying to, keep some of that back so that there's a reason for even our most, loyal players to jump in and want to see, like, oh man, no one has seen a boss mission. What does a boss mission look like? And that, for me, that's important that we deliver on that for everybody. So there's a lot of playtesting that goes into trying to hit that balance. And right now, I would say I have gotten all of the missions that are done, and the campaign is probably 60% complete right now. I have gotten all the missions to a point where I can reliably beat them like 9 times out of 10 if I make a mistake or I forget that there's something going on, like, oh, I forgot that unit has rampage. Like sometimes you're just in autopilot mode because you've played the same mission 100 times.
Right.
But they're all beatable, and they're all beatable relatively easily. There's a fairly obvious strategy that, as soon as you've played a mission more than once or twice, you can kind of see. Nothing in the mission design is unintentional, obviously. Like what units you start with on the board, always intentional, always meant to inform your strategy. Where things are on the board, always intentional, always meant to inform your strategy. That's not to say that some of these missions aren't quite difficult, because some of them are. There's a handful of missions where we drop big surprises on you midway through them, and
Yep.
No one will see it coming the first time and they will lose. And I think that's good. Like, I think that's a good part of delivering on the fun of the game because it's not fun to just steamroll through it and win every single time with no challenge, right? That's
Mhm.
that's not a good game for anyone. So
It's more
that's
like
the
an
dial we have to.
obligation at that point, where it's just like, oh, I
Right.
have to beat this mission, I have to do this. You don't want to make it feel like an obligation. I feel like you want the players to be invested in doing that. You need some kind of surprise and variation between what the people are doing.
Well, and the hope is that there's enough going on here that there's a reason that you want to play through the campaign beyond just its technical difficulty. Like, we have all of this incredible character art, so much work that's been done on a really like incredible soundtrack. We've got some more surprises coming soon that we're adding kind of every day, and the game just keeps getting more incredible in that regard. Like, the single player is where most of the, I don't want to say content, but most of the like creativity in this project lives. It's where all the good art is, it's where all the good dialogue is, it's where all the good, funny quips and one-liners and references are. That stuff is in the campaign. So if you want to dig through and find all of the terrible jokes and all of the funny call-outs, like, you've got to play the campaign to get them. Um, I think that stuff is supposed to be, kind of its own reward, but I don't want someone to feel like they're just clicking through to see the next bit of dialogue or to listen to the next song, right? I want them to also feel like there's a little bit of a challenge there for them and something that when they beat it, they feel good about beating it. They're like, oh yeah, I beat the mission. Not like, okay, well, that was mission number 7, whatever. It's
Right.
supposed to feel like it's rewarding to overcome a little bit of a challenge. Probably where it is today, honestly, is too difficult. Um, some of the people who are working on the project have told me that there are missions they can't beat at all, or that they had to play 5, 6 times to beat, and that's probably too difficult. Like, that means that we've got some more work to do. But we're talking about other ways to solve that. What I will say, kind of to answer your original question, is we're not planning on multiple difficulties. So it's not like you're going to be able to say, oh, put this on hard mode, or oh, I want to beat it on easy mode. We're going to ship one campaign at one difficulty level, but we might have something like a checkbox in the menu where you could select whether or not the game will offer you tips. And there might be a handful of tips for each mission that might help you to go, oh, that's what I should be doing differently. We might do something like that to help kind of ease the process a little for players who feel like they get stuck or like they're having trouble with a specific mission. That's, I think, where we would land on something like that. Because we just don't have, frankly, we don't have enough people working on the game to ship multiple difficulties. Like, I'm building this whole campaign more or less by myself. And like I said, it's about 60% done, but we've been working on this game for a year and a half. So it's going to take time to get it to a place where it's finished, and we've only just finished that one difficulty pass. There's not really room in our schedule to do a second one.
Right. Okay. And I mean, going back to the surprises and the creativity that you mentioned, for people who might be on Twitter, I've at least seen some hints about what's coming. So I'm very excited to kind of see that process flourish when it is completed. And yeah, man, you keep holding on the boss missions. Just let me play one so I can so I can prove you wrong.
Oh, I got to tell you, one of the best things about the complexity of the campaign design systems is I can do a bunch of stuff that, like, even though there's going to be 50 missions, you're going to get to a boss mission and see a new mechanic for the first time that happens in a way that you've never seen before. And like, when I built the first one, when I built the first boss mission, it was the druid boss mission. And even like, I knew what was going to happen. And the first time you try to like remove yourself from the designer mentality and play through it, like, I open it up, I hit the button, I'm like, okay, what am I thinking about as a player? And the first thing happens, and I just sat there like, oh no. And like, that reaction is so good, and I can't wait to see how players react to that stuff. It's going to be so much fun.
I hope you're watching my playthrough at that point because I feel like you're going to be definitely watching out for reactions from players, and I want you to see at that point how my face looks when all of that with all of what you've built up comes crashing down in my face at the end of the day, and I think you're gonna be satisfied with it from the way you sound anyway.
There's a lot to see, and different things will hit differently for different people. There might be parts of it that you loved that I didn't feel strongly about. There might be parts of it that I'm super excited about that you get to and you're like, oh, that wasn't that big a deal. But there's a lot of variety. So my hope is there's a little something for everyone.
Right, right. And going back to maybe a little something for everyone here, mission types. There seem to be a variety of them throughout the campaign. If you don't mind, maybe talk us through the inspiration behind the mission types and why the variation was brought in. I mean, I think obviously we just went into a bit more on the variation, but what was the aim for having those various types scattered throughout the campaign, and why were these five maybe specifically chosen for the story? If you can maybe elaborate on some of those here, because I mean we've got the normal, the hero, the defense. Just a lot of variation in the missions here, and I think while that does go back to what you were talking about earlier here, how exactly are the mission types, or at least can we elaborate more on the types of missions that we can run into as a player?
Yeah, so this kind of plays into something you asked earlier, which was about whether or not the campaign would teach players to play multiplayer. Of the campaign missions, a little less than half of them are what we've classified as normal missions. And what that means is that mission plays like a standard game of cards and castles, where your win condition is destroy the opponent's castle, and your lose condition is your castle is destroyed. And that's it. That's what the different mission types are, is basically changes in the conditions by which you either win or lose the individual mission. And we wanted the majority of the campaign to be kind of that same standard experience, right?
Right.
Kill the other guy's castle before he kills mine. That makes it really clear what's happening, how you win, when you win. As we started looking at the story, what we found was there was a lot of like the big driver for the narrative in the game is actually the game's world, specifically like the geography of that world. So if you look at the game's world map, you can kind of see where all the faction like primary cities are, and you already know from I think some of the general storyline beats from the original game, or even just like the way that the art kind of tells you, there's some pretty well established rivalries, right? The pirates don't like the ninjas, the crusaders don't like the warlocks. So you know that there's going to be clashes between these factions, and you can look at the map and right away go, okay, but the pirates are way in the west, and the Viking or the ninjas are way in the east, right? Like they're on the opposite sides of the map. So some stuff is going to have to happen if the pirates are going to go to the ninjas or vice versa. And that really informed a lot of what we decided we were going to do, because I drew out the world map and drew these lines for how each faction was going to move through the world to get to their goal, whatever their goal is in their chapter of the campaign. And as we drew those lines, it was like, okay, these factions have to pass through these locations, so we should have these types of conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
And the more time we spent on that, the more we realized there wasn't enough diversity. A lot of the campaigns, ultimately, it was going to be like, okay, everyone has to fight the Crusaders and then go beat their main enemy, and that's it. That's the whole story. That wasn't interesting or fun. So we mixed it up a lot with, okay, what if there were missions where you were under attack rather than the attacker, right? Your job isn't to beat your opponent, it's to defend yourself. That was the, genesis of the defense missions. We wanted variety in win conditions. So some of them we have the hero missions where you start with your faction leader on the board next to your castle. If you get to a hero mission, there's one for each faction except for the pirates. The hero mission is generally part of a very specific point in the story where something really important is happening, right? Mm-hmm. You're running into your nemesis or an ally or a major plot point in the overall story. So it helps to kind of add some depth, and also keeping your hero alive in some of these missions is actually quite difficult. So You'll find that it creates a new challenge where you have to use your hero because they're a huge source of your strength, but you have to use them carefully and learn, how aggressive you can afford to be with them. Um, in the original pitch, we actually didn't have both defense and monster missions the way we do now, because defense missions were originally going to be timed. Basically, it was going to be a mission where you loaded it up and the objective said survive for 10 rounds. We tried that and it wasn't a lot of fun. It didn't work the way we wanted it to. So we changed it to, survive the attackers. And you have to kill all the attackers in a defense mission to beat it. So we added. Sorry?
No, I was just gonna say, like, I've tried those as well, and I do have to admit, more fun when you actually have to clear out the enemies invading you, rather than like,
just sit there.
survive for 10 rounds. Like, all right, I'm just gonna wall up and should be easy enough here. It's not as fun in that perspective, I think, which is what you're alluding to.
Right. Instead of the mission being just block and heal, it's okay. I actually have to go out and deal with these units that are on the board. That's more fun. But that also led us to monster missions, where we had some of that same kind of genre of mission that were specifically about a big creature or a big opponent. And now there are, I want to say 8 of those altogether. Not all of them are finished. I think there's 2 or 3 that are still being developed. But the ones that are done, honestly, there's some of the missions we get the most positive feedback on from our playtesters, because you don't have to clear every unit that hits the board, but you do have to clear the big scary one. And it gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of what happens during those missions. Maybe, the big monster pops up, but they also bring allies with them. And you don't have to kill the allies. You only have to kill that monster, but the allies present an additional threat. You have to worry about defending your own units or defending your own castle while you kill the monster. And I think the couple that are available now that people have played, they seem to really enjoy. So I'm excited to see kind of what people think of the additional ones as they come into the playtesting build, and obviously once we release. It also, I think, is just fun because there's a lot of like cheeky, silly things that can happen in the narrative because of it. I'll give you an example. There's a monster mission in the Crusader campaign that is probably my favorite to date, and it's just really heavy on this kind of absurd dialogue about a generic band of people living in the desert, and you have to play it when you can. But it's the payoff is great because you start out thinking like, oh, this won't be so bad, and then you actually have to beat this monster, and you're like, oh, this is really bad.
Oh man, I am excited. I mean, every time you put new ones in the build here, I will say, being one of those playtesters who have gone through a lot of the campaigns, some of them in earlier stages as well, I always love playing them. I always love seeing what your crazy mind has concocted. But going a little bit more off of that here, we kind of mentioned, maybe like 8 monster missions, a number of hero missions. What can we expect in terms of, the scattering of the campaign? But I mean, basically what I'm meaning by that, will we see each faction kind of receive a certain amount of mission types? Will they be more random throughout the campaign? Is that still being worked on that maybe can't be shared? Any sort of thoughts that can be shared in terms of that here?
Yeah, so like I said, the distribution is pretty equitable. A little less than half the missions are normal, and then there's a pretty even number of the remaining types: handful of hero, handful of defense, handful of monster, and obviously a boss mission for every faction. The campaigns are not all the same length, but they're all very close. Every faction gets between 6 and 8 missions. Not every faction gets every type of mission. So, as an example, there's no hero mission in the pirate campaign. Not because it wouldn't have been fun, but just because it didn't fit the narrative. And really, the ultimate thing that we're trying to go for is the story. The story is what matters. So, by way of example, the pirates get a second monster mission. There are 2 monster missions in pirates because they don't have a hero mission. There's no defense mission in ninjas because it just didn't fit their theme, right? The fantasy of the ninjas is they're sneaky and bypassing their enemies. So the idea that they would get caught on the back foot and have to defend themselves just kind of didn't work. And that's really what drove most of those decisions. But you can look forward to a good variety. The majority of the campaign, you'll play one of each mission type in almost every chapter. And you will play them spread out such that you don't really ever play more than two of the same type of mission back to back. And the two that are back to back are normal missions. So you might play two normal druid missions, but then you get a hero mission. You pay two normal pirate missions, but then you get a monster mission. That's the general structure. It's not 100% that way, but it's pretty close. And I think it helps because it mixes things up. There's a good diversity, so you don't feel like, oh, I just had to play my eighth normal mission in a row. Like that's never going to happen.
Yeah, so it's kind of again avoiding sort of that repetitive. You don't want it to become a bore, hassle, or obligation to the players who are going through the campaign, and so you're kind of introducing that spice of variety to kind of keep people maybe more invested or more on their toes in a way.
Right. And also just it's more fun, I think. Like
Right.
after you've played a couple of normal missions, you're kind of ready for the variety. Particularly when you get to the defense and the monster missions where your opponent just doesn't have a castle. Or you get to a boss mission where a boss mission is just like a hero mission on steroids, right? You
Mm-hmm.
start with your hero on the board, but so does the bad guy, and you have to figure out like how do I keep, Genevieve alive against the boss. I'm not going to say more than that. And that adds just an incredible layer of challenge to those missions because some of them are actually like you are wildly outgunned and you have to figure out how you're going to navigate that, and it's good. Like it's a lot of fun. They're good missions. They tell a really good story. That will make for probably the best part of each campaign is its little capstone of its chapter. But along the way, you kind of like, okay, we've had a couple normal missions in a row. Oh, cool, we get a defense mission, and that diversity I think is important to the story for each faction, but also just how it feels as a player.
Right. And actually, taking a bit of more of a sharp turn here into our next topic because at least at this point, I do want to kind of finally dive into the meat of the campaign, and that is the story, as we've kind of been alluding to throughout our conversation so far. So, I mean, to start us off here, talk about the decision to incorporate a more larger story and more lore into this campaign, because for a few years, or for the as long as this game has kind of been around here, or at least this game universe, it's gone without lore really. Like there's been tidbits every few years. There's been sort of speculation put out there for people to enjoy, but nothing really concrete, nothing really solid. Was the inclusion of a story and sort of more lore a way to maybe repair that for the universe, for this game universe, or was there a different motivation behind that decision, kind of creating this separate story for the sequel and maybe hopefully branching out from there?
There were two factors, right? One of them was obviously we're going to build a single player campaign. The campaign needs a story. So when I sat down to start working on writing out the campaign, what's going to happen? What are the motivations for these factions? Who's hostile with who at this point in the story? We kind of sat down and we talked about what we knew about the game universe from the first game because it wasn't like there wasn't any lore. We knew a little bit about, where are the factions geographically. We know that the pirates come from Southport, and Southport is in the tropics in the south. We know that the ninjas come from kind of a separate part of the world in the far east, and that they've got their own space like that. We knew that, the Vikings live up in the mountains in the north where it's snowy and cold. We had these kind of rough ideas of how those things were going to work, but there wasn't the like glue that kept them all together. And that glue for me was the world map. So we spent a lot of time when we first started building the game just figuring out how the world should look and feel, what parts of the world environment mattered. We needed a desert because there's lots of stuff in the game about a desert. We needed mountains because there's lots of stuff in the game about mountains. We needed the warlocks to live in the burnt reach, and that has its own color palette and feel, and the types of creatures that live in it. All of that was really important, and that kind of helped give us a little bit of that sort of connective tissue to define the scope of the world. Beyond that, once we had those things and we kind of knew that there was like, the scope of this world, we knew where things were, who was where, that kind of gave us an opportunity to say, okay, what do we want these characters to feel like? Because you have a mental picture, right, in your head
Right.
of Genevieve, the leader of the, Crusaders. She's this holy warrior, but like, who is she beyond that, right? And giving players characters they could identify with and adding depth and complexity to them, we thought mattered a lot because for most of the people who play games, right, they want some way of recognizing themselves in characters or seeing a motivation in a character that they can identify with. And the characters in this game have to have a lot of complexity because one of the things that's really core to the concept of our universe is all of these factions. If you go to build a deck, you can put any two factions together. You can put the Crusaders, who are holy paladins, warriors of the light, with the Warlocks, who are evil fire-using wizards, and they have to play together. So there has to be a way in the story, in my mind, for that to make sense. We wanted all of the combinations that you can put together to play with in multiplayer to feel like you could see a way for that to happen in the storyline. Um, that motivated a lot of the writing for the characters and the dialogue. So we knew that, even if you were to, I'm going to give you a specific example because I think it helps. There's a mission in the Warlock campaign where they have to go past the Crusaders. They have to go through Crusader territory. And there's obviously a skirmish that takes place because the Crusaders hate the Warlocks. And the Warlocks have an opportunity to do a lot of damage to the Crusaders, and they choose not to because they have some shared history. And the Warlocks go, you know what? That's not what we came here to do. And it adds just a little bit of nuance, a little bit of like, oh, okay, like they're the bad guys and they set everything on fire, but this time they didn't. Like, why? And you start to sort of dig at some of the deeper, history and entanglement between the factions. And we call back to a lot of things in the narrative that technically happened prior to Cards and Castles 2. They happened during the original game or at some point historically even prior to that. So there's history that gets built up and established that also will hopefully encourage players to see potentially ways that things could play out in the future because there's a lot of things in the campaign that suggest additional potential ways that we could play out the story. All of that's really important, and I think it adds a lot, like especially with the character art that we've got for these characters now, where instead of Genevieve being a little teeny blob on a card, like she's this fully thought out, impressive looking character with all sorts of like depth and detail, and you look at her and you hear her and you think like, oh, okay, like I understand who this person is now. That's really powerful, and like we said before, for a lot of our players, we expect that this will be most or all of what they'll do is play this campaign. So we want them to get a really fulfilling sense of who each of these characters are, what each of these factions represents, because that's what's going to make the whole story tick.
Right. Right. If the characters aren't there, then the story just won't be as hard hitting as you want it to be.
Exactly. Like you have to be invested in who these characters are. You have to, respond to the fact that, Headmaster Saris is he's meant to be this very like, oh, I'm in charge and I, wiggle my mustache and tousle my beard and I'm in charge. And then something sets him off and he's immediately just like pissed. And he collects himself and then he's like, oh, well, whatever. But you see in that characterization, like, oh, okay, like there's a little something simmering underneath there. He plays it really cool, but if you upset him, he redlines instantly. Like, that's different, and it sets him apart from Dread Pirate Robbins, who leads the pirates, who most of what he is saying and doing comes across as, fun and silly and haha, we're pirates and we're sailing and we're drinking. But you kind of get this sense that, like, he knows he's actually got to keep the pirates in line. He's got to keep them focused on an objective. Like, those things, I hope, will be, evident in the storytelling and also excite people about how those characters would interact, because you're not going to see every combination of characters in the campaign at launch. There's not an interaction between every faction and every other faction. So you might get a really good sense of who, Genevieve is and how the Crusaders behave, and then realize, like, oh, the Crusaders actually never had an interaction with the ninjas. What would that be like? What would it be like if the Crusaders and the ninjas bumped into each other? How would they behave? And you should be able to answer that question because you can tell from the characters and from the story what motivates those two factions. What would happen if you put the two of them in a room?
Okay. I mean, maybe having some room for some additional, maybe fan stories that branch off of it. You never know. You never know. But going, I guess, on that same direction here, we spent a lot of time talking about those characters. But what about the sort of larger story? I mean, for me personally, I love a story that also establishes some great world building, have more intricacy involved to it. But I mean, how do you guys feel that your campaign plays out to, like, the main story of your, of this campaign? How is it sort of structured? Will it be a wider experience that tells maybe more of a like I said, a world building story, or will it be more of, like, a story arc per se? What are your opinions on sort of the way you guys are telling your story as of right now?
Oh boy, how much time do you have?
I mean, listen, man, we're already at like 45 minutes into this recording, so I
All
mean,
right, so
however long you feel is necessary, up to you. Totally up to you. The platform is yours.
there were so many things that we tried to do with this story, so I'm gonna try to condense it down as best I can. There's sort of three things that are going on in the campaign as a whole. The first thing that you have to know is that the campaign kind of has this very Tolkien-esque there and back again vibe where you move through it and then back through it. So as you go through the campaign, you're introduced to, there's a variety of different kind of major story beats, and you see the first story beat, and that story beat matters a lot again at the very end. And then you get to that second big story beat, and it matters second to the end, so to speak, right? So you have this kind of almost like you went for a walk down the road and then walked back home. You're going to see the same things on that walk both directions, but from two different perspectives. And that's a really core part of how the story plays out. The second thing that becomes very evident very quickly if you're paying attention is that you are seeing all of these events that transpire during the campaign, and a lot of them are actually happening at the same time. So, to give you an example, the start of the Crusader and Warlock campaigns coincide. Those are starting at the same time in the overall timeline of the story. But by the time you start those campaigns, you're already almost at the end of the Druid campaign. You're halfway through the Viking campaign. So as you play these missions, you might start to realize that you're getting multiple perspectives on similar events. There's a mission in or a string of missions in the middle of the like pirate and crusader campaigns where you kind of get the sense, and even the warlock campaign a little bit, where you realize, like, oh, all of these things are connected. The pirate mission where we were defending this place is one perspective, and the warlock mission where we're attacking it is the other perspective of the same part of the story. And that helps you to sort of ground the timeline, so you know right away that that early part of the warlock campaign is actually the middle of the pirate campaign. I'm hopeful that that comes across, because it helps to sort of give you some context for the endings of some of those faction chapters.
Okay.
That's kind of the two like really big things. The third thing, obviously, is that we wanted to tell a story with a lot of real world analogs. So there's the new resource in the game, mana, which you've been exposed to in multiplayer. That's a big part of the story. Like, why does mana exist in Cards and Castles 2, but it didn't exist in Cards and Castles 1? We have to explain that. I guess we chose to explain that in the story, and that's a really like central driving theme of what's happening in the world. And you'll, I think, hopefully get a sense as the campaign plays out that the different factions and their relationship to that resource, that's actually supposed to be kind of an allegory for something that's going on in the real world. And the nuance and intricacy of the alliances and the tensions between the factions, like those things mean something in context of that larger issue around the resource. And we don't get to tell the whole story in the 50 missions or whatever that are going to come out with the game. There's a lot that's happening that you don't get like a total conclusion to, which is definitely intentional because some of these things are not issues that could solve. They're not things that we could tell a story and it's like, oh yeah, clearly that's the end. There's nothing else that could happen there. And also, we want to leave ourselves some room to grow and to add more missions, more chapters, more things that could be interesting. So you'll get, I think, a really good sense of, that there and back again experience, that multiple perspectives of different things that are occurring at the same time through the timeline. And all of that hopefully kind of gels together to really build out, like you said, the world. The characterization to us is important. The narrative structure of, building each of those individual characters out is important. Some of the side characters, honestly, the writing was so good and the, art was so good. They might actually become larger characters in the story later. They might be the inspiration for new cards in our first expansion. If we do that, maybe. That all of that is like really exciting for us because it means that the world is starting to generate its own additional kind of layers of complexity. So now maybe we have sub factions. Maybe that's a thing. You can kind of see like, oh, there's very clearly two different groups of druids in the world. That we didn't know that before this game had a story. Now we know that, and we can kind of lean into like, oh, there's this group of druids who live in this forest and do these things, and then there's this other group of druids that live in this other forest to do this other set of things. Like, okay, what does that mean? Can we do something with that in the game's mechanics? Can we do something with that in multiplayer where you can specialize to a type of druid? It
leaves a lot
opens
of room,
up,
yeah.
yeah, it actually opens up more design space than we had before, which I think is really the best part of how it all plays out. And my hope, honestly, is just that people really they get a better sense of the physical world and where things are. They get a better sense of how the factions interact. They get a better sense of the individual characters, and that's got to come from the world. The world has to be complex and believable, and one of the things that's really hard in fantasy storytelling is quite often it's very linear, right? One thing happens, the second thing happens, but the second thing had to happen after the first thing, and then the third thing happens, but it had to happen after the second thing. Like, I want players to open up a new chapter of the campaign and realize, oh, wait a minute, like, we're just rewinding and going back a little and seeing this same event from a different perspective. This changes, okay, wait a minute, like, that's why when we were in this place in this story, this character was there. And you'll start to see very quickly, like, oh, Lionel, the Crusader judge, is only in this one place at this one time. That's why he's in these missions. And that, again, hopefully helps us sort of cement the timeline of the larger narrative. Like, stuff like that. There's a lot going on, and honestly, I could talk all day about the amount of work that we put into trying to really give this world that coherent, believable structure. But that's the big stuff.
Right, okay. And I think that's a perfect way to kind of leave maybe people wanting more and to actually jump in and see for themselves what you've actually put into it and kind of, again, see firsthand, I think, is the best way to experience something like this. So really excited for that. But I guess maybe piggybacking on what you kind of mentioned there with the future. I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit myself here, what I've got prepared, but I mean, can we potentially see add-ons to the campaign in the future? I mean, I guess that kind of we answered that right there. Just leaving more room to maybe add on more content. Can we expect maybe as players that maybe future content will impact maybe the larger story that you guys have set up here? Will there maybe be new stories branching off? Will we see maybe existing stories continue to play out through the addition of perhaps maybe a new card or two? I mean, obviously, that maybe is way in the future to kind of give a solid answer to right now. But I mean, it sounds like you guys are at least planning maybe for that direction in the future, at least maybe after a major post-release world. Maybe you can start thinking more about that, from what it sounds like.
I mean, I hope so. I think is the best I can say. Um, we had so much we wanted to do, and we had to keep kind of like refining down to like, okay, this is what we can actually pull off. We wanted so many new units and so many new animations and so many things, and all that stuff has, costs and takes time.
Right.
And we really want to get this thing in front of you guys. We want the game to go live, in the not so distant future. So we had to sort of decide, like, okay, this is what we can actually get out the door. Because at some point, it's got to be done, right? I don't want it to be trapped in editing hell forever, where we're just adding and changing and adding and changing. Like, we got to put a version of it out there that players can actually experience. And then, yeah, we would like to go back to it. We'd like to add more layers, right? More cards for multiplayer, more new mechanics. Take those things and either add them to the campaign, or maybe they're inspired by the campaign. Maybe that's where they come from. We don't know when. We don't know how much. I think a lot of that really will come down to what we get for feedback on the game as it launches, right? If people fly through the campaign and are sitting there every day spamming me on Twitter going, okay, but when do we get more? I want to know what happens next. Like, that's going to change how we approach our post-launch content. If, there's demand, and if people are really excited and there's a lot of people who are playing through it, and, it gets its hooks in people real deep, that's a very different result than if, we ship the game and some people play the campaign and they enjoy it. And I'll be honest, I know that most of the people on the team are kind of ready for a break. Like I said, we've been working on this thing kind of nonstop for about a year and a half, a little bit longer for Matt and I. And, by the time it actually gets out the door, I think everybody wants a couple of months to just like take a deep breath, see how people experience what we've already built, and then use that to sort of like, recharge our batteries and go, okay, now we know what hit and what didn't. What do we want to do with that information going forward? So I would be astonished if we never added anything to the game. Like, I think that's kind of inherent in the genre, and we didn't go into this thinking like, oh yeah, it's a one and done project. We're gonna build this and turn it loose, and then we're finished and never gonna look at it again. Like, that's not our intent. So the question is how much and how soon, and that comes down to you guys. Buy the game.
Solid advertising. Buy the game. I mean, listen, that's I'm going to for sure.
That's one. We got one.
Well, hopefully you'll have others more than me. But again, time
I'm
will
sure.
tell.
I'm sure we will.
Right. But I guess, in a way, speaking of how we're not going to just sort of leave the game out once it's done here, obviously, much like in the original game, over its lifespan, we saw patches, tweaks, modifications, etc. to the multiplayer aspect, and I feel like that's going to be no different from, what's going to happen in the sequel. Multiplayer will maybe inspire some balance, some tweaks, some changes, again, as card games normally do go through here. But can we expect maybe those changes to impact the campaign? Whereas, like, we saw maybe one card act in a certain way in multiplayer, it's been changed, but also it had a significant impact in a, campaign mission. Can we maybe expect to see that card, change, or like the mission itself maybe modified a bit, or is the goal to keep the mission relatively the same, but just maybe talk us through how you're preparing for multiplayer changes to impact the balance of a campaign or the impact of a campaign. I mean, obviously, is it something you're expecting? Is it something that maybe you don't think is going to happen as often here? What are your thoughts regarding that?
So this is a philosophical thing, right?
Yes, yes.
When we built the game, for a while early on, we actually had campaign specific versions of the units. When you loaded up the hero mission with Ragnar on the board, when I first built that mission, he just died over and over again, and it wasn't fun. And we were like, okay, what if there was a campaign version of Ragnar that just had like triple as much health? And honestly, it just changed the game too much. It felt like, you were asking earlier about like having the things that you learn in the campaign be transferable to the multiplayer game. It really wasn't if your hero in the campaign missions felt like instead of a playable card unit, it was this super tanky, like now you're not playing a tactical card game, you're playing like a tactical role playing game where you're just playing as your super beefy single character. It upended the design in really, I think, ways that players were going to respond negatively to, and it didn't make the missions better. It didn't make the missions more interesting. It didn't make them more or less challenging. It just made them. It made the emphasis of the other game skills less apparent. So I went back through and I removed all of the campaign specific units and I said, okay, I'm going to build everything in the game using just cards that are playable in multiplayer. Right now, today, that is true. Every playable mission in the current build only uses cards that are available to you to build a deck with in multiplayer, which is tricky because there were a bunch of cards in prior builds that we've cut and decided they didn't fulfill the fantasy or they overlapped too much mechanically with other cards. We've added new cards, and I've had to go back and say, okay, would this mission be better with this new unit or this new spell? It's not out of the realm of possibility, especially for missions where there's like a big surprise that we might actively and intentionally take some of those things that we built for multiplayer and cut and use them in single player as kind of like like this is something new that you didn't know. You didn't even know it was possible for this to exist. And the first time you see it, you go, oh, that's a thing that can happen. That's a way to make that interesting and fun. And most of that would be driven by spells rather than units because we don't have a lot of unused unit assets. So it would mostly be spell cards and the animations that go with those that we would do that with if we did it. I can't say for sure either way, but I think philosophically, I want the experience that you have in the single player campaign missions to mirror something that resembles what you experience in multiplayer. Like we said before, there are, spells the AI gets to cast for free and units that pop out of nowhere that the AI didn't have to play the cards for, and they get a bunch of extra card draw or, things that changed mechanically that are hopefully fun surprises, but they're all within the scope of you can go find that card in your card collection and see what it does. That's really important to us now, but it doesn't mean we wouldn't mix it up a little bit, especially for some of the later missions, the boss missions, just to make them scarier, I guess at some level. And we'll see where we end up on that.
All right. Well, that is very exciting. I think a very solid conclusion to kind of wrap up our discussion here. I will sort of throw out maybe one more of a light-hearted question, just to kind of end it off on, just for, for the sake of intrigue on my end here. Like you said yourself, you've been really designing this campaign, or at least the majority of it, individually, right? That you've kind of been the man behind it all in a way.
Yeah, I'm the little man behind the curtain for all of it so far.
Uh, in sort of the designing process throughout this story here, have you found anything in particular that's really grabbed your interest, or maybe you had too much fun in designing here? Just something to maybe give us a little insight into maybe the personality behind you, and sort of just giving the players at home maybe a little bit insight into your favorite mission that you have made or played thus far.
Oh boy. So I think what I would say is there are a bunch of missions that are my favorite for different reasons. The first Warlock mission where you're defending the Warlock Academy. Building that one was a ton of fun because it allowed me to layer a whole bunch of the game's systems and mechanics on top of each other in a way that is incredibly skill testing, and like it's so incredible to watch. Like when a player gets it, they just go, and all of a sudden like they absolutely kill it. But the first couple times they play it, it feels like this is impossible. There's no way I can win. Like I die every time. And I like creating those light bulb moments where you realize exactly what it's going to take to win. The A big thing for me too in building them was making sure that there was a good sense of replayability. So in lots of single player games, stuff gets really predictable, and there is a level of predictability to our missions. It's not like the events are random. If something happens on round 3, it always happens on round 3. But there's nothing in the game, and we tried this. We experimented with it. We have the tech to do it. There's nothing in the game where it's like, you'll always start with this card in your hand because it's super critical to the way that the mission plays. Like it's all random so that your replays are different. And there's multiple different ways that you can arrive at win conditions. There's a really great monster mission in the pirate campaign. It's a lot of fun. Players respond really positively to it. It's got some really great dialogue. The payoff at the end is a ton of fun, but it takes a lot of build up to get there. And as players play through it, they find all the different ways to solve it. And that's really cool. It's fun to see how people like. I've watched people play these missions. I've built them. I've played them all 100 times, and I've seen people arrive at solutions that I didn't, which is neat. I think what I'm most looking forward to is seeing people get exposed to these boss missions for the first time, because that's where a lot of the storyline arcs pay off. It's where a lot of the best writing and the dialogue is. That's going to be fun. Ultimately, though, if I have to pick one thing, right now today, there's a lot of information about the missions that isn't actually available in the game client. All of these missions have mission names, for example. And right now, when you play the game in the current build, we don't have the interface for that constructed yet. So you click in and you pick a faction and you pick mission number, 4 or whatever. That's all you get to see. But these missions have names that have tons of like referenced bits coming from other parts of pop culture and all sorts of silly things that I got to like introduce to give the world flavor and depth. And my hope is that some of them people will read and go, wait a minute, isn't that from, and like it'll add to the experience of going, okay, like the writers had a lot of fun with this. And that's something that's, I think, for me, going to be a lot of fun to expose, because that's where a lot of the like soul, I think, of the story is right now. Is we have references to other games, to movies, to other franchises. Some of them are incredibly obscure, and some of them are super obvious. The first pirate mission is called "This Isn't Where I Docked My Boat." Like some of them are just silly for the sake of being silly. And I'm really looking forward to seeing people like not only play through the missions and see all the like hooks in the dialogue, but to see all of these references and how they all come together and paint this bigger picture. That's the part that's the most fun for me. So I'm really looking forward to when you guys get to see this.
That is probably, honestly, the most proud parent-like answer I could have expected you to throw at me, and I am perfectly okay with it.
It's very strange to look back on how like I work on this game basically every day. I have for pretty much the last year and a half, give or take. And to finally see it all coming together, the art's come in, the dialogue is punched to exactly where it needs to be, the world map. We had an artist who spent hundreds of hours building that thing, and all of the elements on it are all standalone, discrete little 3D pieces. And like, just to finally get to see all of the references, all of the dialogue, all of the art, all of the game mechanics and systems that we spent so much time on. The fact that I have played most of these missions, I would say, somewhere on the order of 100 times a piece, to make sure that they're really well balanced, that I know that they're beatable and that they're not too random. Like those things are important to our experience for you guys. It's just going to be so much fun to actually turn you loose on it and let people see the whole thing in its entirety, all stitched together.
Right, and that world map, I will admit, absolutely gorgeous. I did show it off in the thumbnail of our campaign reveal. I'm not sure if anyone had picked up on that. I don't show the whole thing, but there's a bit that you could see in there. But honestly, it looks much better in color. You got to see the full map for yourself to really admire its glory and beauty. So I'm kind of right there with you in that. Like, I do want to let other people see it, but I know it's gonna maybe take some additional time for that to happen. But yeah, really, really exciting stuff. With that being said, though, that's going to be it for me. Vect, is there anything that you kind of want to give the people out there, just like last time? Anything that you kind of want to leave off on with people? Closing message, advertisement, anything that you want to kind of give a little more as a send-off?
Yeah, I mean, number one, thank you for doing this. We obviously appreciate how much time you put into Cards and Castles as a whole, and that you're so excited about the sequel, and you're giving us your time. I would say we're very much looking forward to more feedback. So if you're someone who is potentially open to doing a little bit of single player testing, we do have some openings for some additional play testing. It would be great to get some more folks looking at this stuff. If that's something that interests you, feel free to hit us up. Myself or the game on Twitter. You can find me at Lack of Realism or the game at Cards and Castles. We'll try to get some more folks looking at this stuff. We're going to try really hard to make a priority of getting early access done for people in the not so distant future. So you'll be able to wishlist the game on Steam, buy the early access version, try some of these things for yourself in their completed form. Hopefully not too long from now. Please make sure you're keeping an eye on our Twitter, Discord, the website, all of the stuff that is out there for you, and we will try really hard to get this thing in your hands as soon as we can.
Right, and that being said here, guys, follow the channel as well here, keeping you up to date with everything related to the sequel. I'm going to try and do my best as well to share with you as much as I can here to make sure I don't get in trouble with Red Team Games, which I don't think I have so far. Vec, can you quote me on that? Am I doing good so far?
You're in like the yellow zone. You're good.
Oh shit. All right. Well, with that being said, folks, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Be sure to, do the old YouTube stuff, like, share, comment your thoughts, subscribe, all the fun stuff, and I'll see you next time. But until then, guys, stay gaming.